Um, so it's really an amazing. It's the brilliance of the universe really just all never ceases to amaze me. Remember that saying? And I mentioned this before about how the way that the language of math is translated in physics codes or DNA codes, lines of communication, how I can say certain things like that. And then others that experience the communication, it means I don't have to cover the whole library in order for your library to assimilate what those codes being activated represent in the dynamically linked libraries of a circulation library, a memory bank, a water bank, blood and water, right, of what we hold in memory that we have the ability to experience because we have a connection to that, right? So a lot of times, some people have mentioned to me that I communicate in code or it's cryptic. It really is simple communication, which means I shouldn't have to take an enormous amount of time to share everything that I've experienced through which I've learned from that experience. The result in the intentional use of energy, which is consciousness, with a soul arcing, integrated in spirit, what I experience and thus share with others. Right? That's why I realized when I was a child, there's what you experience or what everything else is experiencing, what it is that they are in energy. And then there's what I'm experiencing that represents the energy that I am as an oversoul polarity integrator, experiencing everything that is happening simultaneously between every density and every dimension, between the pre-matter phase, right, and experiencing the matter. And the matter is based on the codes, which is the formatting codes, which is the programming codes, right? It's based on the template that you're running. So that's what made it easy when I was a child, is you're mapping the terrain, you're mapping the blueprints, okay? Or if you will, the software that everybody's running. So a polarity integrator, the way that I decide communicate this by virtue of the experiencing that I'm having. So I use certain words that can be cross-indexed and linked to their own experience and from what's being held in memory, that they go, wow, yeah, because they have related experiences in the way that the codes, which represent the way the numbers work as to the function of math, as those numbers are related to geometry and the function of numbers, or if we will, the elements, the elementals, the molecules, the spirit molecules. That's why a tetrahedron is 4, a 4-square crystal, right? So what happens is when I realize there's a lot of very beautiful things that are happening that I'm experiencing now by virtue of experiencing what others are experiencing, they communicate to us. So I ran across a couple channels this morning that popped up that the AI presents to me, one of which is a lady that I love who has a channel called Wake Up Africa, Dr. Mummy Saraki. And she mentions also words that are cross-indexed that are similar patterns of communication that is like, yeah, right? So you realize the level, if you will, her state of consciousness, the level that she's operating at the time that she's communicating what she's communicating using the language of English, which are the codes, which is the math, which are physics, based on the divine template that she's running, that I become aware of what she becomes aware of by virtue of that communication. So she mentioned a couple of important words like the intentional use of energy, the intention, right, of her energy, and thus the intention of that energy. So what happens is, and I have a tendency to do this, and this is how I share as a result of what I experience in energy through my heart and my soul and my spirit, and then I'll just begin writing. And I kept, gosh knows how many journals that I kept, but what I do is I used to stack them up and then leave them for others. Okay, like I did with Chris Nadeau. When I met Chris Nadeau, another AB positive, in the Gospel Mission in Grants Pass, because I was sort of tuning out, the indoctrination side of how that sort of works, that they're loose bends is really what they are. It's all about following orders rather than experiencing being free by being able to heal yourself, right? from essentially what are code transfers, viral code transfers that have corrupted the codes, so they're not running the original codes. So if they're not running the original codes, then they're not experiencing the point of origin or the center point of every star, of every sphere. So they're experiencing the 7 eternal suns. And you have the seven nerve centers, right? Now we're back into neurons, right? Neurochemical messengers, right? And the pineal gland, now the glands work, the thyroid, and all the rest of that, on how DNA works as a communications platform, so that we can all communicate with each other and experience who we all are being together, because we're connected to each other through software in a planetary motherboard, right? So I wrote down a few things this morning that she mentioned, where she talked about the intention of energy. So the first thing that I drew after I thought about the intention of energy was the cross. See? So in a matter of just a couple of minutes, just thinking about or commensurating with myself the meaning of what she was talking about, the intention of energy, that's what I was experiencing, is what I was experiencing next in sequences, what I wrote down. So I wrote this down after I thought about the intention of energy that she was communicating to us. And I had, because one of the things that she was mentioning, and one of the reasons why I put the compass up there, see, north, east, south, and west. So the center point of that compass, when you're in a state of perfect balance with the actual sonic tones, then the lines of communication that represents the center point of that star, the center point of all those spheres, are mathematically aligned with the law of one. So now you're experiencing eternal unconditional love through the center point of that sphere, right? Every sphere, every cell, every molecule that are bonded, right? The glue that holds us together by virtue of the fire, the catalyst, the resin codes, right? And she did mention a comment about residues, right? So I mentioned that in a previous video of what I experienced in this house, because 2 people have recently passed away, over the last 6 months to a year, right? So there's a lot of residue in this house, which is based on the waveform of the lines of communication that is represented by the software that they're running, that I'm experiencing by virtue of translating with my antenna of what they're experiencing, right? That I'm experiencing through my radio set. Right? The radio body, radii. And so I was having fun with this morning, because there was another channel popped up right below that was called The Rhythm of God's Musical Spheres Essence. So you realize that just those few words, all of a sudden everything just starts to flow in a natural flow, which is a natural rhythm that is in balance with the music, because you love to play music in spirit. And those are the tones, and those are the waves, and the lines of communication of what it is that we're experiencing. Now my left hand is going like this. Like a circle like this. A circle, and then you have the circle that's going the other way, the one that's going vertical. Then you have other lines that are spinning. It's the electrons, protons, and neutrons. They're spinning in perfect balance. And so then we're back to polarity, right? So the next thing that I saw that another friend of mine put up was something that Wano Savin had done a short video, and I guess this wasn't that long ago. I think it was during this last summer, if I'm not mistaken. And he was making reference to the flat earther stuff, and this was actually a very important video that he put out, because he's very correct about this. Because all he did was have to make a few references, and I've certainly said this till I've been blue in the face, actually, ever since I was a little boy. When you get into map reading and right, so most people know what a map is, right? M and then an A and then a P. And so map reading. So that's why when I was a child, there's no coincidence why I was experiencing what I was experiencing, for which I was learning. It's like putting a puzzle together at a very high rate of speed, which in many ways is reverse engineering the Metatronic system that they built, right? In order to return it back to zero. Okay, because that's what you represent, right? Which is zero resistance. So now you're back into motherboards and diodes and nodes in a network, nodes at computer terminals communicating with each other, right, on a motherboard through the magnetic circuits that we're experiencing, what we're all experiencing, being together between two magnetic poles, right? And then that's what I was measuring when I had this avatar up and running at a very high rate of speed. You're mapping the planetary consciousness software terrain as to what? The loss and gain of electrons. Or if you will, the torque speed differential between loss and gain. Right? And that's when you get into the pole shift stuff, right? So now you can get into the numbers game, which is what I call AI, or if you will, finite light numbers games. And so it's one of the reasons why you could probably see why would I spend so much of my consciousness. A partner that I was with a number of years ago to provide her what we call a safe zone, because she still had, as I remember it, she was like 30% a Cherokee. Her descendants, okay, the ancient descendants that she's connected with through her DNA, her bloodline, was Cherokee. In Oklahoma. That's when I was in. So you can sort of see why I would end up at the University of Arkansas. And of course, that goes back to DOS, disk operating system, silicon, right? And crystal, and of course, carbon, hydrocarbons, water carbons. And what I refer to here that went to the next thing that I began writing down. Base 12, 3, math and physics codes. So see the circle, pupils, holographic vortex, mathematical visual information, matter state, consciousness codes, DNA codes, agua, distance, equal in distance, log scale distribution of ethers, ether speed codes, guardian stealth code, ISO. So the next example that I do with that others can cross-index through what's being held in memory, how the math works for this, when you get into holographic speed and what it means to have a stealth code, it means they can't take a picture of us, okay, to track through their quantum probability mapping systems, right? Where they think you're going to be next, because if you're playing war games with another unit of consciousness, now we're into competition, right? Now we're back into minus slash the plus, which is the calculus, which is the polarity game, right? So I knew as a little boy, I don't play head games. I don't play AI war games, okay, which is black hole stuff, right? Now you're into the moves on the checkerboard, right? Black and white. And so I was aware of this as a child, and because you realize that I have a job to do. So I realized that at 4 years of age, I put my left hand, both hands over my heart. I am what love is. It goes on forever, gifting electrons at an accelerated rate of speed. So I'm not in a game with nobody. I'm not trying to compete against anybody. So therefore, I use all the experiences that I have had as a way to translate how math and physics works in an electromagnetic spectrum way between one extreme and the other, if you will, and how that loss and gain works in consciousness by virtue of what we experience that is giving us the result in the use of our energy, because we're connected to all the other units that are experiencing who they are versus what we experience, which is what we are. So when we're experiencing what love is, we're experiencing those that need to heal. And that's really what it is. I was measuring how much light would if you're going to release an enormous amount of voltage to experience the primal light and sound fields, right, in order to get everybody up, so that everybody is healing, held within all the records, which is held within all the cellular memory and water. You can, imagine that number, that number is just way too big. So it's like I'm not going to spend my energy in trying to run those kinds of numbers, because imagine how far back you would have to go in time, which means at the point at which the first divine template was created or manifested into existence that we thus now can experience, means that all the lines of communication are open between all the gates, so that wherever you are, you're experiencing being loved. Okay? That was my memory at 4 years of age, and I never lost my memory. Okay? So I don't think it in terms of memory, because now we're back to memory and no memory. No batteries required. That's eternity. So that's always going to be what I call the central point of reference. That's called a frame rate speed of reference. So what I used to do because I love photography, because I love to go out in nature. So you're already taking a picture at the speed at which you're taking pictures of what's happening in your visible light spectrum, right? Your holographic projection screen, your holo eyeballs. So now you're into the pupils, right? And pupils as in students, right? And so I had as I remembered, it was a Canon ESO Rebel, as I remember it, and was using I believe it was a 1,000 speed film, right? And so I was looking at what would be a 205, which was a UH-1, the same helicopter they were using in Vietnam, which could hold up to 15 people in the ship, and then it had a drop tank. This was an actual helicopter I was assigned to in the U.S. Forest Service on the Angeles National Forest as an initial attack crew, which means because we have a helicopter, we can get there fast. It was sort of a spin-off of the smoke jumpers up in Missoula, Montana. So instead of jumping out of an airplane, we jumped out of a helicopter at a 15-foot level, right? So we had to learn the same mechanics of how to jump out of an airplane, right, and roll or hit properly and roll without breaking a bone or causing any damage to our physical bodies, so that we can get the work done that we're doing. So what I did is I took a picture of while it was in flight, and I was able to, and that film, because of the speed at which the shutter speed, right, which is the holographic shutter speed of what's happening in the visible light spectrum, the projection screen and the planet, it was able to stop the blade. So in other words, the shaft horsepower of that blade is moving that blade in a circular way in order to gain lift, which is altitude density. Now you're into electrical density of mass, consciousness, right? On the amount of energy that ship needs in order to do what? Overcome what? Drag, baggage. The weight that it has to lift, right? To elevate vertically on the electromagnetic spectrum. So the short shaft horsepower on the rod, God's rod, right? The rod that runs through the entire Cathar grid, that rod was going up and down, right? And it was spinning a blade horizontally, right? So the shaft horsepower on that, as I remember, was somewhere around 1,800. Somewhere around 1,800 revolutions per minute. So then you can get an idea of the spin rate, right? The actual spin rate of that blade in order to lift the amount of weight that's on that ship at any one given moment of now time in order to be able to lift and fly, right? Like an aerial drone. And so I caught the blade. Wow, I stopped the blade, see? But if you're running a still stealth code, there's nothing there. Whoa. Now you see it, now you don't. Right? And that allows for a stealth code grid worker to get work done. Right? Because they know they want to take you out, right? For obvious reasons. Okay? You're a source of energy. Hey, you're an eternal source of energy. Hey, we always want to be plugged into you so we can feed on you. See, so the more that they can feed on our energy does what? Extends the AI war game. Which means as long as they're connected to us and they represent a black hole state of consciousness, they can keep AI war games, finite war games going on in perpetual motion into perpetuity until all of a sudden it realizes, whoa, shields are up. Crystal spiral shields are up. Guardians must be in here now. Uh-oh. Game over. that means that there's only going to be a limited amount of eternal light that we're going to keep running on in order to feed and expand this black hole. How big is a black hole? Now you're into units of energy, which represents a formation, for matter code consciousness in formation that is experiencing itself chasing electrons. So you realize that as one unit of consciousness is experiencing the loss of electrons, now has a source of electrons that are accelerating at a higher rate of speed, allows it to do what? Expand its black hole consciousness, because it's getting those electrons from other batteries, which is why they want to hold those batteries captive, to keep feeding on those batteries, right? And in order to do what? Maintain what they're aware of, which is what? War. So you realize they want to expand and increase the war, right? Where more units of consciousness are accelerating at a higher rate of speed in which they've joined as a larger formation of consciousness, which represents the alliances between star nations, to keep draining more energy from us. Or, if you will, the 7 eternal suns, the Rainbow Bridge. So it's just like I mentioned Karen Ann Luke McDonald. How many souls you want to keep throwing into the fire, right? Down the black hole. Keep throwing them into the black hole. Now that increases the size and the speed and the acceleration of migrating from one galaxy to another, that galaxy to another, that galaxy to another, and it migrates all its way up, as it was shown in the Guardian materials, from one level of creation to another level of creation, to go all the way up the EKKA. Whoa. This thing's trying to collapse the whole enchilada. Yeah, that's exactly right. So another way that you could explain that, by virtue of experience, is experiencing somebody on a hamster wheel chasing electrons. And do a number count. Right? So you can see that in Los Angeles. How many people are living there? How many people are you measuring that are chasing electrons every day? You know, what is the law of least effort, which is the law of balance, which means non-polarization? Man, you're experiencing not having to do any work. And you can tie that directly into what I experienced through a couple of experiences that I had in childhood, which was learning how to do breath work from a gold medal swimmer whose name happened to be Donna De Verona. So, in other words, these are not coincidences why I'm introduced to certain people upon which I now experience what I'm learning through them. Oh, so we're in a learning classroom. Yeah. So what I was learning through Donna De Verona was breath work. To do what? Motor through water. Okay? Like a dolphin, a fish. Man, you're really motoring back and forth in an Olympic-sized pool. Yeah. Remember, you got to turn your head to one side. You know, kicking your feet, motoring right along, right? So that breath work can be cross-translated and being thrown into the Pacific Ocean by my dad. So now you're going to swim in the ocean. So this is called packing your own parachute. Ever read that book called Packing Your Own Parachute? Those are called transferable skills, which means they're translatable skills in an electromagnetic spectrum, right? Your environment that you're operating in. So now we can go to body surfing. When I was body surfing at Newport Beach, right? When you're taking off on big waves that are pushing you down into that washing machine, right? And the ability to hold, right, the air in a vacuum of space in order to have enough time to get more air. And that's the living breath of life, which is the living breath of love, which is the living breath of aloha tea, right? A standing wave. So we love to ride the waves, the crystal waves, because those waves were so beautiful at Newport Beach between 15th and 17th Street in the afternoon. We called them glassy. Oh, glassy waves. Yeah, crystal spiral waves. And so you can make a further translation into this. When I was on a hotshot crew, which was, the first crew was a 30-man crew. Hey, that's 3, huh? The numbers don't lie. Just like June 6, 1944, when all those folks hit D-Day, right? You can even translate that into the Battle of the Bulge when it comes to the numbers, and why these certain infantry and why these regiments and these companies all have letters and numbers that are associated with each other between two magnets on a planet, right? between negative/positive, right? And what? Loss and gain of electrons in order to do what? Maintain the poles, the balance of the poles, which is the balance of the water worlds, right? Between hot and cold pressure, APIN, right? Air pressure information numbers. And so the breath work was tied into that particular hotshot group because I realized through experience what I was now experiencing, which was a greater capacity. When you put this into the context of what we call a food density network. So you say, for example, well, I eat breakfast, I eat lunch, and I eat dinner, right? So you can imagine yourself out on a fire line, right? And so I'll just give you an example. So we get up at what was it, 8 o'clock in the morning. They would feed us breakfast. And then we go out and do calisthenics, which were pretty rigorous. And then we went for a run, which was normally at least run for about 1.5 miles. Now, this is when during the daytime it might get up to, say, 90, 93 degrees at 6,000 feet elevation. So you're doing all this physical anaerobic and aerobic activity at 6,000 feet elevation. Okay, so that's less O2, right? Than it is, say, down at sea level, right? Atmospheric pressure, altitude density. And so what ended up happening is that we would do that every single morning, and we had gone out and worked all day. With some guys were running 35-pound chainsaws. So you can imagine what that does to build up the strength of their muscles, right? And the energetics with their arms and their shoulders and their back and their legs, right? And cutting brush all day long to build what's called a fire break, right? And then at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, after we've done that, now we're gonna, hey, we got a fire call, right? So now we're gonna chase the spirit of fire. We get down to the low country where now it's hotter, smoky as heck, wearing a lot of gear in very hot weather, right? Now you're gonna cut fire line on the fire. So it's like, gosh, when are we? Some guys that were on the crew would say, how long we got to do this for? You have no idea. You could be out there for the next 56 hours straight. So now you're into the food stuff, which means we need water, right? And don't we need food like protein and stuff like that as a way in which to use that energy to keep our battery powered? So what I began to realize was that we have the power to self-generate what it is that we need as to the elementals, and that would include water. Okay? That's right. And the reason that I know that from experience is the rate of evaporation, condensates. You would think if you measured and saw the picture of what I had done all day long, including the other folks that were on the crew, just how much energy was being exchanged, right, to maintain a certain gate speed based on the breath work that you're doing, right? To maintain your balance and your harmony and your rhythm, because when you're on a crew where we're spaced 10 feet apart, right? Another number, that's a 1 and a 0. We're spaced 10 feet apart and we're moving at a particular speed through the electromagnetic spectrum, right? Based on the energy and the vibration to which we're all moving together as a team of 30 folks that are cutting line, which means we're separating between what's burning and what hasn't burned yet, right? And I began realizing, and I've mentioned this before, I had reached my sixth wind, which means at one point I thought I wasn't going to have enough air, electromagnetic energy, right, to keep running my battery. Wow, I need another wind. Then I need another wind. So I wasn't getting an increase in energy from the source of water out of a canteen or, eating something that is either growing or has been provided for me. I was experiencing the energy that became my food. That became my fuel. So the fuel that kept my battery going was the breath work that I've learned how to do as a living organism, right? In a living central nervous system, right? Which would be eternity, neurons. So therefore, everything that I need to keep my battery going and doing the work that we were doing, I had to reach what I call my sixth wind. When I reached my sixth wind, I realized, hell, I could go on forever doing this now. I don't need any water or any food. Ask any breatharian. So that becomes another frame of reference when I was about 20 years of age of what I'm learning through experience. So experience is the teacher. So you're learning to work with, right, the living spirit energies of creation itself with your oversoul to maintain your perfect balance between the center point of all creation, which is what love is. That means you're experiencing God within your own heart and soul. God's always with you. Okay? God isn't going to let you go down. Of course not. So you have a relationship, right? And that makes it pretty simple, right? Which means we don't live in a black hole. So that's why we're here, right? Now we got to stop what too many people are falling into that hole. Hey, we're going to pull you out of that hole. Hey, we're going to pull our children out of that hole. So these are like fragments of self. Part of what was part of the whole, now I'm going back to what I remember when I was a child. If I'm experiencing a loss in you, I'm experiencing a loss in me. And I'm not supposed to experience a loss in me, which is to experience a loss in you, because we're gifting electrons at a high rate of speed that go on forever loving you. So this is how I translate everything that you are as what I am. Because you're in my mirror. Okay? So when you're experiencing eternity, you know that everything that came after that is in your mirror is a part of what we are. Right? The point of origin. So when you're experiencing the point of origin, the point of origin will take care of what it is that you need in energy. Because you're on fire to experience who you are in energy. Right? So what else did I put in here? Oh, yeah, this morning. Assimilate. So you know what A is? A is one, right? So asimilar. Similar as in geographical mathematical patterns of sound and light. Now you're back into mapping, huh? Mapping DNA templates. So this is, I put learning through experience. The result of that experience, what did the soul, integrated with living light spirit, learn in that experience from the result in the intention in the use of our drive motor vortex tetrahedron? 4, right? 3 times 4 equal 12 spears, right? Equals what? 3. We're back to 3. So A equals 1 on E, right? 5 minus/the plus. Calculus, spirit waveform balance in the geometer. The geometer. Biovoltage lines. Power indexing the balance in the lines of software water worlds of H2O. A-ware. H2 plus 1 equals 3. Experience being 1. One with all creation. So the encryption and decryption of gene code engineering sequences of fire letter code activations that represent sound and light patterns of musical spiritual creation spheres on fire to create. Yeah. More of what we give love to, which is the energy we use to create it with. DNA water worlds, born free out of what eternal spirit on fire to manifest creation spheres, experiencing simplified learning through experiences. So yeah, here's where I jumped over to 107, the final dance. So I sort of knew this as a child, but you can see how this works on a compass between, remember, formations or units of consciousness that are aware of who they are, that are connected to others in a network that they're communicating with, which would be the intentional use of the energy by virtue of how they communicate with each other, what the intention of their formation of consciousness is going to do next in sequence. So when 107 mentioned, I use different words, which is sort of similar in the way that he is communicating what he's communicating to us, what I call the final dance. So the final dance, I realized, was going to have very much a lot to do with North America. Or if you will, America, Turtle Island in specific, particularly when you break down the mechanics of celestial manifestation and the 12 tribes and clans and the importance of North America or America, right? And also South America, particularly when you get into the Eastern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere between North and South, right? Particularly when you get into bloodlines or what I call polarity. You know, the difference between the two. The torque speed differential between the two with a 4. The tetrahedron. The center point, bang, light the fire, right? Flash point, ignition point. Now you got a fire. Center point, which is the base. So now you're into base 12 math, right? Which is 3, right? So I referenced, the cross-reference to a few things on all this was like movies. One of the reasons why I watched a lot of movies. And I'll give you an example. When you represent eternity and you're experiencing something that is held in memory, in a memory bank, a water bank, and my consciousness is now in there, and I'm at the center point of every sphere, then when I'm experiencing something, particularly if it's actual film that's been held in memory, you realize we can transmute that. Okay, now you can see why I spent a lot of time as a child, even though I was very aware of all the programming, particularly with TV sitcoms and a lot of those daily shows they were running, like Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, and all that, which is the Truman Show program, APIN programming, which is, if you will, an overlay. It's an architecture, you know, it's reality, how that reality is being experienced by virtue of all the units of energy that are experiencing those reality streams, you know, live streams, you know, the difference between living water with a living spirit, dead water zones, dead spirit, lost and gain. Now the difference between a living light reality that is experiencing what love is and another unit of energy, which is consciousness, is experiencing a black hole, finite light. So that's by being sucked down a hole, being vacuum cleaned right down a hole. Right? So hey, we gotta get you out of the hole. So imagine that the goal here is to transmute, or if you will, invert back to experience eternity, a massive black hole in a galaxy. Right? That's a lot of energy, isn't it? So there are shorter ways and there are longer ways. What do you think is the shortest solution to the problem? To heal everyone. Right? Because how long do you think it would take you for every unit of consciousness that is in a black hole to be able to experience what we are, which is what light is, which is what love is? How long would that take? Right? So what is the short answer, the short solution to that, right? Well, what I did in 2016. Remember, a full process ignition, right? Light yourself on fire, right? Now you experience being the seed and the flower, being one with all creation, gifting love forever, right? So I call that a hard reset. That's like a reboot, right? Yeah, reboot, complete recalibration. So you're recalibrating, bringing the divine template back online. So that's code activation. Now codes, spread them all out using big ass scalar waves from the center point of the planet's core, the ecosphere, the ecospheres, right? And boom that energy out so that every neuron, every cell, every molecule is experiencing we are, which is what love is. And they experience the real McCoy. So he talked about the flat earther stuff and how that was he put up a little picture there that said Illuminati, right? And then I'm immediately reminded of who one of the big flat earther types, because he has a lot of followers, right, that are following this stuff, which is the guy that came out of Australia, Mr. Astrology, right? And so this is sort of when we get into, remember, they know what we know, and particularly when you have something held in memory through artificial finite light intelligence, and then the information that they become aware of is thus what they now replicate into creation by virtue of being able to communicate what they're aware of with us. Because I picked up on him a number of years ago when he was first putting stuff up, and then I began realizing that he was gaining in followers. And one of the things that 107 mentioned, and this is important, is how many units of consciousness were now integrated with his unit of consciousness. And that becomes a larger formation of consciousness that was now attached to Mr. Astrology based on the flat earth stuff. And what did Juan say that I've sort of been echoing for a while, which is really a military, right? Mass, electrical density consciousness, psychological operation. That's right. Because I remembered when I was 4 years of age, I don't follow nobody. I don't need to. Right? That's what it means to be a free spirit. I operate on behalf of the one. I am a one. Right? So that allows me to be free as a musician, right? To do what? Self-generate. Music. Music that is in harmony and rhythm. Right? So you're on fire to create. And so you're in love with your universe, which means we're in love with our mirrors, which means everything that's in our mirrors. Right? So you can sort of see how it's not like there, this is this is what I call when I was a child, filtering content. Because I already realized when I was a child, anything is possible, right? If you're an architect and you've worked with templates and you go to a drafting table, you realize, hey, I have creative imagination. I can put anything together, whatever comes to your head, and say, here's a flat earth. Okay, well, show us how you put that together. Okay, so in your mind, that's how you put that together. Okay, so that means that's a replicate. You duplicate what's in your mind, now you put it on a piece of paper, and that's an artifact. Okay? So now you're going to experience how that works, right? So what are you experiencing by virtue of experiencing what you just did, right? And so therefore, all possibilities exist, right? Because you already acknowledge I have infinite creative imagination, which is infinite creative intelligence. So you realize that the highest intelligence is what love is, right? In order to maintain what we're aware of, which is what love is. So you're not ever losing your connection. You're not ever losing your God connection that you experience through your heart shield. So love is what protects us, because love is what created us. It was born out of what love is in water worlds. So I tied the final dance into a couple other things that can be cross-translated in the minus/the plus terrain, cross-referencing it to a movie called Deliverance, Dueling Banjos, Competition of Biotech, right? And Patty Broussard happened to mention that about human angelic DNA galactic black market, why the human DNA goes inert and won't fire the coded program instruction sets. So I figure I certainly don't need to explain why it won't fire. It probably has something to do with higher level intelligence, right? You think? So now we're into movie codes, particularly AI finite light black hole math codes between two magnetic poles of a planetary software conscious directed energy mirrors based on DNA coded sequencing of vibrational and frequency coded APIN reality driven program apps across the entire spectrum analysis of experiencing the mass electrical density consciousness balance between loss and gain of electrons, right? That's ultimately what it is, right? So you're in a math game, you're playing a math and physics game, with something that's needing your energy as a result of being in a hole. So now you can get into understanding motherboards with diodes, nodes in a network, resistors, torsion field movie players, resistors and capacitors, friction loss as it relates to what? Sound pressure and volume of soul arcing light and spirit, H2O, Ethernet worlds of log scale graphing of mapping waveform harmonic decay, losing shield protection. Okay, losing shield protection. That's why when I was 4 years of age, that's the first thing I activated. Was my planetary, the universal and galactic and planetary shield. That's the first thing I